For the last couple of years, the Cooler Master TD500 has been a solid choice for anybody looking for a high airflow, good quality and affordable PC case. But what if you wanted something that looked exactly like the TD500, was cheaper and more compact? Well, until now you would have been out of luck, but not anymore. So the TD300 then, it is exactly what I've just said. It's a smaller version of the popular TD500 from Cooler Master. As you can see, it still has the fine mesh up front, so that mesh panel, as well as acting as an air vent to let airflow into the system. It's also a dust filter as well. There's no dust filter behind that, so it's easy to clean. Quick wipe of any dust on there, and that's more or less your system maintenance done with this case. Obviously there are other similarities between the TD500 and the TD300 other than the front panel. The front panel design obviously looks extremely similar as well. It's got this polygonal 3D kind of mesh look to it. At certain angles it does have like a 3D effect with the light hitting it at certain angles. One difference between the TD500 and the TD300, other than its size, is this tempered glass side panel on the TD500. The lines from this side panel kind of continued through the tempered glass. That's not happening on the TD300, it's just a plain tempered glass side panel. The glass removes with just two thumb screws, loosen those off and the glass comes out. It's got a mild tint to it, but it's not too dark, and those thumb screws are captive on that side panel. And as you can see inside the case, it's a micro ATX layout, so in here you can install micro ATX and mini ITX motherboards. If we just remove the front panel, I can just show you behind, that it pulls off pretty easily. It is just the fine mesh there, so like I said, that also acts as your dust filter as well from the front. And you can see there's no dust filter covering the fans, and the fans are installed on the front of the inner chassis panel as well, so that gives you a bit more space inside the system. These are the 120mm sickle flow fans. We've seen these in loads of different Cooler Master products. In terms of how many fans you can install on the front panel, so if you want to install fans on the outside of the chassis panel, you can just install 220 or 240mm fans. If you want to install an additional 120mm fan, you will actually have to bring the fans inside here, so that will encroach on the space inside the case and slightly limit the length of your graphics cards that can be installed in here. Also, if you want to install more fans, there's space up top for two more 120 or 140mm fans. And then you can also see in this rear panel, there's another space there for another 120mm fan. So it looks like it'll allow you to install a decent amount of cooling if you want to do just an air-cooled setup. Maximum CPU cooler height in here is 166mm, so that's pretty similar to ATX cases because it is still a similar width as an ATX case, but just limited down to that micro ATX form factor for the motherboard. So it's obviously a lot more compact than the TD500. In terms of radiator installation, you can install up to a 280mm radiator at the front, so that also includes 240s and 120s as well in there. And again, same at the top, up to a 280mm radiator in the top of the chassis is available as well. Maximum graphics card length, if you have the fans fitted on the outside of the front, you can fit up to a 344mm graphics card in there, so pretty much any latest RTX 30 series or AMD 6000 series cards will fit inside this case. The only thing worth mentioning is this is only a 4-slot PCI cutout layout, so if you do have a really thick graphics card that has a big cooler on it, you might find that it's quite close to this power supply shroud, so you might have some slight reduction in airflow to the fans of the graphics card if it's a real big fat meaty card. It is quite a basic case. Inside there's not really any bells and whistles or any kind of innovative new features or anything like that. You have got some grommets on the cutouts down the side of the motherboard tray, the other cable management cutouts at the top and at the power supply shroud. They don't have grommets on there. You can also see on top of the power supply shroud as well, there's two mounts for SSDs here, and those just use a some pushing rubber grommets that you push into these holes, and then you screw some pegs into the drives and they just push in and rest in place there. So they're not firmly fixed in, but they shouldn't, you know, come out. They are held in pretty tightly on those rubber grommets. Also on the front of the power supply shroud as well, you can see the cutout there, so that allows for a radiator to go down past the power supply shroud, or fans obviously as well. On top there's a magnetic dust filter as well. If you remove that, you can see it's a nice big open vented section. And then around the back of the case, again, there's not a lot to say about it, except for you've got a bit of a vent at the top here for some residual heat to pass through, a fan mount there, 4 PCIe slots, and then your power supply shroud down at the bottom. And then the other side panel, again, is just held in place with thumb screws. Again, these are captive thumb screws. Panel just slides back and lifts out. No sound dampening material on there, it's just a plain sheet metal side panel. Then around this side again, pretty basic. You've got about 20mm of cable management depth between the side panel and the motherboard tray. There's a fan control as well around here, so this is a PWM signal, can be connected to your motherboard header as well. It also controls the RGB lighting of the front fans, so the sickle flow fans at the front are RGB fans as well. You can see the grommets that I pointed out earlier, and the cutouts for cable management. There are some eyelets scattered around as well for cable management, and also 2 more SSD mounts here as well, so you'll put the grommets in again and the SSDs will just hold on the pegs on there as well. So on the power supply shroud and on the back of the motherboard you can install 4 2.5-inch SSDs there, so that seems like a good amount for a micro ATX case. And just move these cables out of the way, you can see there's also a 3.5-inch drive bay down there. Just grab a screwdriver, there's a screw in there, so it is a thumb screw but it is a bit tight first time you remove it. You can completely remove that, so that allows almost unlimited space for power supply and power supply cables. Alternatively as well, there's 3 different locations for this 3.5-inch drive bay, so if you want to keep the drive bay in and create a bit more space for cable management, you can move it forwards, or if you want to move it backwards and make more space for a radiator, you can do, but that will obviously limit your power supply space and probably make cable management a bit more tricky. But I'm going to leave this out because I'm not going to be installing a 3.5-inch drive during the build. Just quickly show you how the 3.5-inch drives in there install. If you've ever had a Cooler Master case before, you might have seen these. So these are just 2 plastic guides that push into the screw holes on the hard drive, so 1 in each side, and then the drive just slots in and then locks in position. Then you just pop it back in, tighten up the screw in the position you want. So nice and easy installation of hard drives and of SSD drives in this case. Then on the case floor you can see at the back there's one of those very cheap perforated metal mesh dust filters, removable, so easy to clean. There's some feet as well that raise the case up about probably 15 to 20mm off the floor for airflow. And the only other thing really is you can see this arrangement that helps you move the drive bay around. So yes, it is quite a basic micro ATX case, but that is kind of reflected in the price. It is about £85 in the UK, which a couple of years ago you probably wouldn't have said was cheap for a micro ATX case, but because of the way things are going at the moment and prices of everything seems to be going up, it is pretty fairly priced, I think, that as well. There are 1 or 2 other features I just want to show you. So top panel, or the front I/O connectivity, you've got a reset button, 2 3.5mm audio jacks, 1 for headphones, 1 for microphones. Power button is the Cooler Master Halo logo, which is a nice little touch, and you've also got 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports. No USB Type C port though, which is a bit of a letdown in 2022. We usually see those on even the lower end cases nowadays. But the other feature I wanted to show you as well, which is kind of the TD300's party piece, is this top panel. It's like a convertible. So the reason I want to show you this, because it's quite a useful and handy thing, especially in micro ATX when you've limited for space. So sometimes you may have installed your motherboard and installed an air cooler on the CPU. Maybe you've put a couple of fans up in the top here, and then you've done that thing where you've forgot to connect up the EPS power connector at the top of the motherboard. That's where this comes in handy. So you can just remove some screws, and the whole top panel just removes. So instead of trying to fiddle about for half an hour trying to plug in that EPS power connector and then realizing that you have to disconnect the fans or take the CPU cooler off, with this you can just lift up that top panel, plug in that EPS connection, and you're away. So it should be a time-saving thing. I'm not saying that I've ever done that. I mean, I have heard that people sometimes forget to connect up that EPS power connector. I've never done it myself, but if that did happen with this case, it's going to be a lot quicker to fix the problem. So that's pretty much all the main features of the TD300 covered. As I've said, you can pick this up in the UK now for about 85 quid. So move on now to the build, because obviously the best way to test any case is to build a system inside. So that's what I'm going to do. And for the system, I'm going to be using this B550M Aorus Pro motherboard. Use this a few times in various builds. CPU is going to be this AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, so that's the 8-core 16-thread CPU. Memory, I'm going to be using this G-Skill Trident Z. This is a 4x8GB kit, so 32GB in total, and it's a DDR4 3600. Storage is the PNY XLR8 Gaming CS3040 M.2 SSD, PCIe Gen 4, and it's a 1TB capacity. Graphics card is this reference edition AMD Radeon RX 6900 XT. And then for CPU cooler, I'm going to be using this Cooler Master Master Liquid ML240 Illusion. Not used that before, so it's going to be interesting to see how that looks. And then powering the whole system is the Cooler Master MWE 850 V2 fully modular, and that's a 80 plus gold rated 850 watt unit. So let's put this thing together and see how it goes. TD300 build is finished. You can see it's all up and running. It looks pretty good. RGB lighting on those front sickle flow fans, it's not the best RGB light in the world. The LEDs are all concentrated to the centre of the fan, so on the outer edges of the fan the lighting looks a little bit dim, but it's not too bad. I do prefer the lighting on these fans on the cooler as well, because they've got like a double ring on the outside as well. In terms of the build, it went pretty straightforward. It was quite a quick build. It took me more time actually setting up the RGB lighting with 3 different bits of software than it did to actually build the system. As you can see, I've got it in this like purple colour to match with the Cooler Master theme. Couple of things worth mentioning. The graphics card is quite close to the power supply shroud, so maybe airflow is choked off a little to that card, but that is probably more of a design thing with the motherboard, because the M.2 drive is above, so you have to lower the card, or the card is lowered down a little, and it's in like the 2nd and 3rd slot rather than this top PCIe slot, which would have brought it up slightly a little bit. Not a massive issue, although it might affect the thermal performance a little. We'll have a look at that soon, because I have got the 3D Mark Timespy Extreme stress test and Cinebench R23 stress test running simultaneously. If you installed a couple of SSDs down here, that would bring it really close to the graphics card, so I would definitely avoid installing SSDs down there with the card like this. Another thing as well to mention about that area of the case as well, the PCIe slot covers, the top 2 are removable ones, but then the bottom 2 are the ones that you break off. Seems a shame that, because as I found, you have to use the 3rd one down, which is one of the snap-off ones. I would have preferred it if they would have all been the removable screw-in type. Other than that minor issue, it's not a bad case to build in. It's very basic, so the cable management space isn't huge. Removing that 3.5-inch drive makes a big difference. I'm glad I don't have any 3.5-inch drives installed in here, because there would be very limited space under that power supply shroud with this power supply for cable management. Actually, managing the cables on the backside of the motherboard tray, that's not bad. They seem to be routed quite well, and the eyelets for tying them down with zip ties all seem to be in good places. I only probably used 4 or 5 zip ties on this, so that's usually a way I like to measure how good the cable management is in a case. The less zip ties you need to use, the better it is, so that's pretty good. I've purposely not installed a rear exhaust fan. Probably if I was using this case myself for my own system, I would normally put a fan in there, but I wanted to test the thermal performance with just the kind of the stock cooling configuration with just those 220mm fans at the front. Obviously AIO fans, they are fitted at the top with the radiator, so that's going to be exhausting the warm air out of the system from the CPU at least, and obviously some residual warm air will be coming out of these vents at the back and the top and everything. So I have the 3D Mark Timespy Extreme stress test, so that's the 4K stress test that's running in a loop constantly, and the Cinebench R23 stress test, that's also running in a loop simultaneously. So stress testing the whole system, the CPU and the GPU is getting up to temperature. I've been running it with the case side panel off for about 25 minutes. System is getting up to its steady state temperature, and currently with the side panel removed, you can see CPU temperature is around about 84 degrees C, so that's the actual component temperature, not the ambient temperature. Ambient temperature in this room at the moment is about 18 degrees, so it's pretty cool, but around 82 degrees on the CPU seems pretty normal. That's nothing out of the ordinary for the 5800X. It's quite a difficult CPU to cool. And then the GPU temperature also is around about 80 degrees. I've also run the same stress test with the side panel installed for 60 minutes, and that does increase the CPU and GPU temperature. GPU around about 5 to 7 degrees C and just a couple of degrees C on the CPU. So in either configuration, the case cools reasonably well. It's quite a high-end system this, so it's quite a tough one to keep cool, especially for a smaller and more compact and restricted micro ATX form factor case. So I'm quite happy with how the case cools. In terms of its looks, it is quite basic, but I do like that front panel design. I like that kind of 3D effect to the mesh on the front, and it's quite an understated case. It wouldn't look out of place in a gaming room, even probably in a home office or something like that. So as an all-rounder, it's not a bad case. It is quite basic, you don't get a lot for your money, but then again, as I said earlier, it is reasonably cheap by today's standards. It might have been a few years ago, you might have thought £85 is on the mid to higher end for a micro ATX case, but these days I think that is quite a budget price. Let us know what you think of the Cooler Master TD300 in the comment section. I hope you've enjoyed watching this review. If you like what we do here at Kit Guru, please help support us by heading over to our store and picking up some merch, or maybe even subscribing to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.